My name is Joseph Buckley, president of John Reed & Associates, and in this brief video presentation, I would like to discuss three interrogation issues. The description of the interrogation as a guilt presumptive process, the issue of privacy, and the purpose of interrogation. Some social psychologists describe interrogation as a guilt presumptive process, suggesting that investigators interrogate people who they believe are guilty of committing the crime, even though they may be wrong, and that they will use any and all means to get a confession, whether the confession is true or not. Well, when you think about it, the opposite of interrogating individuals who the investigation points to as the probable offender would be interrogate everybody and anybody who's questioned during the investigative process, whether there's evidence implicating them or not. And obviously that would be an unacceptable situation. We recommend that interrogators should never use the interrogation process as a means by which to assess a subject's credibility. But they should always conduct a non-accusatory, non-confrontational interview, develop investigative information from the subject that can be investigated, such as their alibi, relationship to the victim, their activities during the time period in question. And it is when the information generated during the interview and the subsequent investigation indicate that our subject is probably the offender that interrogation would become appropriate. The second issue that I would like to discuss is privacy. As I think everyone realizes, most interviews and interrogations ideally take place in a quiet, private environment, maybe an office or an interview room, and typically present are the investigator and the subject. Some social psychologists try to describe this private environment as an effort to separate and isolate the subject. We never teach any investigator to detain a non-custodial subject or to prevent them from reaching out to others. In a custodial interrogation, the subject is advised of their Miranda rights, and if they invoke any of those rights, the interrogation is immediately terminated. It's interesting to note that the United States Supreme Court understands the need for interrogation to be conducted in a private environment. In one of their cases almost 60 years ago, the court stated the following: often the place of questioning will have to be a police interrogation room because it is important to assure the proper atmosphere of privacy and non-distraction if questioning is to be made productive. The third subject that I would like to discuss is the purpose of an interrogation. Some social psychologists suggest that the purpose of an interrogation is to get a confession, no matter what and at any cost. The purpose of an interrogation is to learn the truth, and there can be several successful outcomes to an interrogation. Obviously, the first and most common successful outcome is where the deceptive individual acknowledges to us they did commit the crime, and they give us corroborating details that substantiates the authenticity of that incriminating statement. But a second successful outcome could be when the individual says they didn't do it, maintains their innocence, but says they know who did it, and they have been intentionally concealing that information from us. And during the interrogation, they give us the details as to how they know that this person committed the offense. A third successful interrogation is a circumstance where the individual maintains their innocence but does acknowledge to us that they did lie about some significant element related to the investigation, for example, their alibi. Maybe they were at some place or with some person that was embarrassing to them, and they don't want a public disclosure of that information, so they concealed it during the interview, and so as a result, there was some suggestion they were being less than candid at that point. Finally, a fourth successful outcome of an interrogation is where the investigator realizes, because of their persistent and adamant denials, this may not be the person who committed the crime. We should terminate any interrogation of them and continue with our investigation to see what other information we can develop. For additional information on these three topics, I would recommend you go to our website at reed.com, and we have a section called Investigator Tips. These are articles we publish on a regular basis on the website. And there are a number of those tips that address these different issues in more detail. Thank you very much for taking a few minutes to listen to this presentation.